And we're live.
Good evening and welcome to this week's this week's second public forum. This forum is a time for the community to provide comments and suggestions on the draft police reform plan to be submitted to the governor by April 1st. My colleagues and I have been reviewing the draft plan and will use the public input we hear during these sessions to inform the amendments we make together. I point out too that these are listening sessions and we won't be interacting with the speakers, but we are certainly taking it all in. As a reminder, all speakers have 3 minutes for their comments. If speakers are participating via Zoom, we ask they address council with the same respect they would expect and to avoid the use of profanities. A staff member will notify speakers when they have 30 seconds left, and speakers will be removed from the Zoom call once their time has expired. Staff members will read the first 3 minutes of all written comments that are submitted. We'll have the comments and we can read them all, but into the record for this call, the first 3 minutes will be read. If you are participating on Zoom and watching via live stream while you're waiting to join the meeting, please remember to mute the live stream before entering the Zoom meeting, or you will hear a confusing echo of the live stream. So with that, we'll get started.
Ryan, Harry, Zoom.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hi there. My comments. Hello, Rochester citizens and city council members. Thank you for letting me speak in the public forum today to strongly support the recommendations of the Police Accountability Board. Additionally, I support the new policing blueprint envisioned by the Pastors Roundtable. I urge the council to reject the current proposal. It means very little once many of the specific measurable goals and timelines that are in the PBAB's recommendations are stripped from the plan. The draft plan has removed from the PAB's recommendation for the termination of officers who support white supremacy organizations. By protecting those who do support these organizations, the city and the RPD are in effect supporting white supremacy. I am concerned about language in the draft plan that focuses on data, technology, community survey, and working towards a culture of service. This language diverts attention from the change we need to create. A culture change needs to happen immediately. Every case that has recently come to the public's attention sees disrespectful at best, degrading, and aggressive comments from RPD officers. We saw this with the officers mocking Daniel Prude. We saw this in the pepper spraying of a 9-year-old girl. We saw this in the pepper spraying of the mother and the 3-year-old. And yet again, we saw this treatment of Tayshawn Jones. If I spoke at my job the way RPD officers seem to speak to the public in a seemingly routine way, I wouldn't have my job. So with that, we need to support the ability of the PAB to enforce its disciplinary findings. There should be no lawsuit contesting this ability. The system can claim to embrace accountability while striving to retain the outlandish privilege of policing itself. The PAB must be fully funded to serve their purpose. The PAB recommendation states that by the end of 2021, the city shall commit to providing the financial and institutional support for a process to achieve longer-term change to Rochester's policing public safety budget. The city needs to prioritize its biggest issue, and right now that issue is the RPD. The PAB has a major role in this and needs the full support to carry out its duties. Please focus all possible energy on the recommendations of the PAB. Please focus all possible energy on the new policing blueprint envisioned by the Pastors Roundtable. We need to abandon the 1819 slave patrol blueprint that the RPD currently follows. So I ask the council to reject the draft plan. A complete work of the policing blueprint needs to happen. The city and the RPD need to commit to a significant change. Thank you.
Barbara Van Kerkhove by Zoom.
Good evening, everyone. I fully support Ron Herade's comments, and I will add my own. Like Ron, my heart is aching at the most recent unnecessary killing of Tyshawn Jones. His death, along with the RPD's other known acts of violence since March of 2020 on the Black citizens of this city, emphasize that we need more than piecemeal reform in our system of policing. We need to develop a plan to abolish our current system and imagine and create a new system of public safety and wellness that works for everyone. We can start this transformation by making sure that our Executive Order 203 plan is strong and includes specific measurable outcomes and deadlines, and by giving the Police Accountability Board the powers and funding it needs to do its job. And here's how you do it. First, you need to compare the mayor's proposal with these set of criteria. They have to be concrete, not aspirational commitments, that they have goals that are specific and measurable with clear deadlines and concrete funding attached. According to an analysis by the Police Accountability Board, almost every major recommendation in the draft plan did not meet these criteria. I urge City Council to assess each set of recommendations using these principles, and if they do not meet them, then send the plan back to the mayor's office. A report by the Brennan Center for Justice shows the widespread incidence of explicit racism in law enforcement. I urge City Council to reject the plan unless it includes the center's recommendation to quote unquote, prohibit individuals who are members of white supremacist groups or who have a history of explicitly racist conduct from becoming law enforcement officers in the first place, or from remaining officers once bias is demonstrated. According to the Brennan Center, this is the most effective way for law enforcement agencies to restore public trust and prevent racism from influencing law enforcement actions. In addition, I urge the final version of the plan to incorporate the recommendations of the Police Accountability Board, to note where the PAB's recommendations were included, and to explain why certain recommendations are not included. With respect to the Police Accountability Board, I want to see it fully funded with $5 million annually so it can carry out its work in a timely way. And I also want that the Police Accountability Board get all of the information requested, provided in a timely manner so that it can conduct thorough investigations. And finally, I advocate that the board have full disciplinary power, and I want the City Council to work to make that happen. And then all of this I want reflected in the city's budget. This means reallocating funding from the RPD to invest in programs, services, and organizations that work with city residents to create a safe and thriving community and where people can get the support when they need it. Thank you.
Yachika Johnson by Zoom.
Greetings, my name is Yashika. Racism is a public health crisis. Please help protect my family in the city of Rochester. The Rochester Police Department is supposed to protect and serve. They have officers with repeat offenses of brutality and murder and still working in the community. They do not see Black people as human beings. I would like to see officers terminated and pensions revoked, reallocate those funds to support the Police Accountability Board and mental health community services. Provide them with $4 million each immediately, and every year revisit their budget needs. Let's go back to advocate. The Police Accountability Board mission is to advocate for the community and hold the Rochester Police Department accountable. But without proper power and funds, how can we proceed? For example, Daniel Prude's murder from the hands of the Rochester Police Department, the Police Accountability Board has the authority to request documents in his case and that led up to his murder. It was requested and proper documents were not provided from city officials. The 9-year-old girl who was pepper sprayed, same thing, no proper documents provided. The community has a right to know all details so the Police Accountability Board can hold those police officers accountable. Lack of funds and power has paused that process. Rochester needs more resources for mental health, wellness, and crisis. The community needs mental health professionals to contact when in crisis. Residents needs people who will empathize and make life-saving decisions toward interventions. With funds reallocated to the Police Accountability Board, they will be able to provide proper, prompt, fair justice for police misconduct, reimagine public safety, be an advocate for sustaining long-term change, be the national model for community control of police. With funds reallocated to mental health community services, outcomes will be improved quality of life. Imagine being free of the symptoms when having a mental health crisis. Improve relationships, reduce chances for complications, better performance at school or work, reduce risk of mental or medical issues, encouragement and support. The injustice events within the Rochester Police Department of brutality and murder has to stop right now. Please help protect my family here in the city of Rochester from the police culture of white supremacy, the Ku Klux Klan, and the Proud Boys. Again, racism is a public health crisis. Protect, fund, and save this community. Thank you, and God bless you.
Reverend Lane Campbell, Zoom.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, council members. I am Reverend Lane Campbell. I'm the minister of the First Universalist Church of Rochester in Rochester's downtown. A plan for policing in Rochester must be centered in accountability and transparency. As a Unitarian Universalist and as a person of deep dedication to my religious tradition, the central question for myself and for my community is, what would love do? What is love calling us to do? Love shows up in this community's call for accountability, for clearly expressed deadlines and reforms to our policing. Love calls for less Black death and harm in our city of Rochester at the hands of Rochester police. Love calls for full funding of community-led and driven measures for accountability, of course, such as the Police Accountability Board, as the folks who have spoken before me have already articulated. Love is lacking when we have vague commitments. Love is lacking when we do not honor the memory of the dead in our city by continually allowing police to kill and harm Black people without accountability and transparency. Love is not found in systems that empower police to harm our community, and love is not found in a system of policing that regularly traumatizes the police officers who are on duty, with little or no care for themselves. Love calls on each one of us to examine our racial biases, and love calls us to say that those police officers involved in white supremacist organizations are not fit to serve in our city. I am deeply disappointed at the lack of thoroughness and the lack of community involvement that has been asked for in this process of developing this plan to address Executive Order 203. And I am deeply disappointed that feedback has been solicited through a website, not where folks in the community can actually hear from one another. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, but soliciting feedback through a website's not going to get the kind of feedback that we want from our community. I am disappointed that the recommendations brought forward by the Police Accountability Board, the Faith Leaders Roundtable, and other organizations in our community have been dismissed. We can do better, and love calls us to do better. I'm really grateful this evening for this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Shirley Thompson, Zoom.
Thank you and good evening. I appreciate having a chance to speak with council tonight. I like to watch Trevor Noah at night, and one of the things he said last night about the Atlanta slayings was that everybody knew that was going to happen. Everybody knew that what happened in Atlanta with the killing of 8 people, 6 of them Asian women, was going to happen. And yet nothing was done. It was business as usual. And it begs the question of what we're doing here in Rochester. We have seen what's been happening since last year. And everyone knows that that is going to continue unless we make a huge change. And so I'm wondering why the recommendations, the draft recommendations from the city do not include funding for the Police Accountability Board. That's one of our surest ways of holding the police accountable proactively and as they do their work and after the fact. And I can't figure out why changes aren't being instituted to help that happen. You know, because I know a number of you on city council. I've broken bread with some of you. I know of some of you. And I still can't help but scratch my head, wondering what kinds of conversations you're having and why it appears that there's stalling in terms of doing what needs to happen on behalf of the community. I don't know if it's a question of wanting to retain power, retain control when your community is crying out to you to make changes. I'm really not sure. But I'm asking you to bring pressure to bear where you can and to make sure that the recommendations that are needed in the Executive Order 203, that they are included and that they include funding, adequate funding, at least $5 million for the Police Accountability Board. And I'm hoping that you will adopt a number of the other recommendations from the Police Accountability Board, which they received from the community. I'm hoping you'll adopt, thank you. I'm hoping you'll adopt a number of those recommendations. And I hope you'll ask yourself what the reasons are that the changes have not been instituted already that could have been. You only know yourself, whether it's, as I said, control, power, but I'm asking you to think in the interest of the community. Thanks very much for this opportunity.
Reverend Sherry Halliday Kwan.
Thank you. Thank you, President Scott and council members, for taking our comments this evening and over the last couple of days. I'm the second Unitarian Universalist minister that you'll hear from in this 10-minute period, and I echo the calls to courageous love from my colleague, Lane Campbell. But I find myself, like Elder Thompson just now, scratching my head, trying to figure out what exactly you're all paying attention to. What we pay attention to grows. And I've heard a lot of people over the last couple of days, and I imagine tonight, a lot of people talking about specifics where the Police Accountability Board's recommendations were removed from this response to Executive Order 203. That doesn't feel entirely accurate to me. It doesn't feel like they've been removed so much as never incorporated. The slim suggestions of the immense amount of capacity that the Police Accountability Board could have to restore trust to public safety in this city is encased in this response plan with talks of real litigation, but doesn't seem to address the ways in which also 75% of the city voted in this board. The executive order and the response plan very clearly has the mandate to make changes to policing that restore public trust. And from what you're hearing, I hope that you are taking away that this response plan, as it stands now, does not do that. The inability to fund and legitimize the Police Accountability Board has not done that. And so City Council's ability to restore trust in the systems that are meant to serve and protect this city and its people thus far are falling short. I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for receiving our comments, and thank you for using your power to do what is possible to reimagine public safety. Thank you.
Alora Rivers by Zoom.
Not in the waiting room, Hazel.
Okay, thank you. Liz Brown by Zoom.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you for receiving our comments, and thank you for using your power to do what is possible to reimagine public safety.
Liz, if you're watching a live stream, you'll need to mute it before you begin speaking.
I'm sorry, what do I need to do?
If you're watching the session on YouTube, just make sure you mute it so you don't get a feedback.
I can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. Liz,
I think Liz muted herself. I'm not sure if she's trying to figure out her audio issue.
Sorry, what do I need to do?
If you're watching the session on YouTube, just make sure you mute it so you don't get a feedback.
I can't hear you.
thank you. Liz,
Can you, I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
yes,
Okay. I kept being told to mute.
mute on the YouTube screen.
Well, that's
I
what I'm
think
on, I
Liz
guess.
muted herself.
Anyway,
I'm not sure if she's trying to figure out.
you can hear me, right?
Sorry, what do
Yes, but we're
Yes.
still getting reverb.
The session on
I'm
YouTube,
getting
just
a-
make sure you
A
mute it so you don't
sound
get a
delay.
feedback. I can't hear you.
Can you mute the YouTube session?
Can you, I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Barely.
Okay. I kept being told to mute.
Mute on the YouTube screen.
Well, that's what I'm on, I guess. Anyway,
I'm not sure if she's trying to figure out.
I don't understand you you. can hear me, right? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'll email you. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous.
Just make sure you mute it.
Sound-
Racky Granville, Zoom.
He's in the waiting room. Just give us a minute to catch up. Okay, I think we should be all set. He's there.
Are you there, Mr. Granville?
They're connecting to audio. One moment.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm not sure if Rocky can hear us, but if they're ready, they can begin speaking.
Mr. Granville? Can you hear us, Mr. Granville?
I don't think it's working. We can circle back.
Christy Raish, Zoom?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, hang on one second. Sorry, just give me one more second. Hello, my name is Christy Reich, and I am here to speak in favor of fully funding the Police Accountability Board. I am not quite sure why that is necessary, given that the Police Accountability Board was voted for by an overwhelming majority of 75% of voters. It seems the PAB should already be fully funded, fully staffed, and fully functional. The withholding of the necessary funds is another example of systemic failures designed to harm Black and Brown people in our community. Accountability is not punitive. Accountability is not harmful. Accountability is just. Accountability is necessary when harm has been done. If we do not allow the PAB to have the power the voters demand, then we continue an unjust system created to harm the citizens and visitors of Rochester. We know the Rochester Police Department harms and even kills. Instead of serving and protecting, we know that Daniel Prude was murdered while naked, unarmed, handcuffed, and covered with a hood. We know that a 9-year-old child was pepper sprayed. We know that a mom and her 3-year-old child were pepper sprayed. We know that Tyshawn Jones was killed while in an obvious state of mental distress. These are just 4 of the blatant harms we know about that RPD has perpetrated in the past 12 months, 3 of them in just the last 6 weeks. If these are the things we know about, what other harms are perpetrated by overfunding of the RPD and over-policing by the RPD? When the only tools you give the police are weapons and violence, we can only expect their actions to be violent. If you refuse to defund the police, if you refuse to end police violence, the bare minimum that remains is accountability for actions that harm individuals and our community. We must fully fund the PAB now in order to ensure that when unjust actions happen, RPD is held accountable. We cannot have unity within our community without accountability. We cannot have justice in our community without accountability. We cannot have peace in our community without accountability. Your job as City Council is to serve the people of Rochester. You are public servants. You obtain your power from and by the people. It is your obligation to honor that trust and create a community of peace. Fully funding the PAB is one step towards peace and honoring the voters' voices. Thank you.
Diane Stingle.
The draft reform plan.
You're on mute, Bridget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The draft reform plan is woefully vague and toothless, relying on training and suggestions. There is an appalling lack of specifics and consequences, fatal flaws in the plan which guarantee that nothing will substantially change. This appears to be the intent of the mayor, RPD, Locust Club, and some members of the City Council, to maintain the status quo of allowing RPD to kill and abuse, especially Black citizens, with impunity. Rochester is better than that. We deserve a new vision for public safety that values and respects all Rochesterians and works to keep them safe, thriving, and able to enjoy the benefits of a true democracy and civil society. In many infamous examples, RPD made the situation much worse than if they had not shown up at all. RPD's culture is hopelessly brutal and corrupt, to the point that the only solution is to dissolve it and start a new public safety organization that carries no guns and is mainly engaged in de-escalation and peaceful intervention. The size of the RPD is twice that of other comparable American cities. At the very least, it must be cut in half, and the resulting savings must be invested in resources that would lift Rochesterians out of poverty and despair. These resources include public housing, public health care, social workers, better public transit, mental health assistance, and job programs. The PIC team must be fully staffed and funded so that they can successfully manage the calls diverted from RPD. PAB was approved by more than 70% of voters and enjoys wide public support. It must be fully funded and empowered to fulfill their mission to hold RPD accountable, expose abuses, and oversee changes and improvements in RPD operations. The people of Rochester expect and deserve no less.
Ellen Aspro.
To the members of the Rochester City Council, Rochester needs a public safety system that is free of white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, and that is service rather than violence and arms focused. As we have seen again and again, we do not need heavily armed police officers responding to mental health emergencies in our city. We need non-police resource teams that can provide culturally responsive care for those in crisis. It is time to increase funding for such teams and to fully fund the Police Accountability Board.
Doug Ackley, Zoom.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Doug Ackley. First off, please fully fund and support the Police Accountability Board, and please do not vote to support this executive order plan. It's rushed. It contains vague action statements that do not lend to enforcement or accountability. Many people's voices have not yet been heard. It seems more like a list to satisfy a series of thoughts that have been put out over time. Many truly have not imagined the possibilities or opportunity that this moment, this time calls for when it comes to public safety in our community. Where is a space to reflect the voices that say that the whole way that we've been doing this policing thing needs to be dismantled and that something better can emerge? I never will know how it feels to be a person of color when those lights flash behind my car or men and women in blue approach me and my friends or arrive at my house. I know what I have heard from decades from people of color who have been verbally and physically abused and not been listened to. We continue to see disturbing body camera footage. If that's how some people act when you're being watched, imagine what's happened to countless people over the decades when cameras were not rolling. I have seen and heard firsthand what they say to me, a fellow white guy, things like, I hate these effing kids, or a white guy like you shouldn't be around these neighborhoods, or our job is to keep crime contained in these areas so it doesn't get close to where we live, just to name a few quotes I have heard. I have met with chief after chief giving officers' names, quotes, actions I have seen, heard, and heard about. We still cannot get these officers off our streets. I hear, oh, they're in counseling or we're working on it. Not only do they not need to be out here, but they need to never be let in. We have tried training RPD recruits in the academy, youth police dialogues for years. We have had grave concerns about what comes up when inevitably race comes up. Responses, even by officers who seek to understand more about racism or whiteness or privilege, are still offensive and racist in their questions and comments. This does damage to our Black and brown young people. You cannot easily untrain racism. Let's call it what it is. We've all been drowning in the sea of racism for generations, oppressors and oppressed. Racism has been so deeply ingrained in our culture, how we're brought up, media, TV, newspapers, and magazines. Saying I'm not a racist is like going swimming, coming out of the water, and saying I'm not wet. Even with good people at the top or the bottom, it is nearly impossible to shift the culture. If there were good, decent people at the scene with that 9-year-old girl, the culture took over and carried more power. Exactly for police that if you stand up, other officers may not have your back or might take a little extra time if you call for help. Wow. Where is the space for a new plan? One that, in the words of someone I respect deeply in this community, allows us to address our social issues without armed men and women. We are past reform and need something new, creative, and effective to heal, not a Band-Aid on a gaping wound caused by the past and current system. Thank you all.
Kathy Rivers, Zoom.
She was in here, but she's not anymore.
Okay. Maxim Yamil Cabazuto Brown, Zoom.
I think Kathy's back in.
Is she?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Kathy, whenever you're ready, I'll start your time.
Looks like she's still connecting to the audio.
Kathy, you can begin if you can hear us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And good evening, council members and President Scott. I'm Kathy Rivers, a resident of Rochester and a member of the PAB Alliance. Thank you for having these forums. It helps to bring the kind of true transparency and community engagement in the development of the executive order plan that was supposed to be included from the very beginning, but instead was often ignored in the development of this draft, as I'm sure some of you are aware. I have so many concerns about this Executive Order 203 report. In its current state, it's hard to know where to start. I'll just go ahead with the most obvious. This report is not really a plan. An effective plan includes commitments, actions, measurable details, and specific timelines. All of these are missing from the current report. What's more, it's been considered as a resolution. It's being considered as a resolution, which is not legally enforceable in any way. The elements necessary to create a meaningful safety plan were included in the report submitted by the Police Accountability Board. Please put those back in. We also need the PAB itself featured prominently in the plan. Rochester wants the board to be independent and engaged in reviewing overall police or RPD policy and procedures, and specifically investigating abuse and misconduct complaints. We need the PAB to be given the staff, resources, and funding necessary to respond to all complaints within 90 days. Include these elements in the plan, along with commitments to appropriately fund the board, as well as community health and housing resources and the non-police first responder crisis teams that we so clearly need to keep our community safe. Reallocating 50% of the RPD budget can help us meet these needs and must also be added back in with timelines that include completing at least some meaningful portion of this in the upcoming budget for 2021 to 22. The current report includes valuable ideas about how we can change policing in Rochester, but they're couched in terms like consider, attempt to, and work towards. We're past the time to be thinking about what we maybe ought to be doing. Rochester's in crisis. We need action, effective planning, and commitments to funding alternatives to policing, particularly around mental health and domestic dispute calls. We need clarity and transparency around policing itself and consistent civilian-led review. We need to get the Locust Club, members of white supremacist organizations, and their toxic influence out of the city of Rochester. Include the requirements to address this. Terminate officers who engage in or support white supremacist groups. Demilitarize the RPD. Ban the use of chemical weapons. Ban handcuffing and pepper spraying children by the end of next year, or this year, sorry, by the end of 2021. Put the RPD under a civilian commissioner and require civilian-led budgeting processing and community approval. Thank you.
Maximil Cavazuto Brown, Zoom.
The plan that was brought to the state was a disgrace. Not only does it have loopholes in it, but it's not what our community needs. The idea of police is not only does not make sense, but it's harmful to the people who need the idea of police the most. The police are supposed to lower crime rates, protect people in our community from violence, and help people. But instead, police cause government violence, fail to bring down crime rates, and kill people who need it most. Executive Order 203 does little to address a system that was built to suffocate the oppressed and build up the rich. If the system was really built to reduce crime rates, money would have already gone to red line neighborhoods to balance the scale, so people are not growing up in the worst form of violence, which is poverty. So what's the solution? Stop the expansion of the police state. Invest in Rochester and build up impoverished communities with restorative practices by reallocating the wealth. Imagine Rochester without barriers held down by police. Imagine an equitable, diverse city where everyone thrives and people are held accountable by their community. For some, this seems unnecessary, but we won't grow when things are easy. We grow when we face challenges. So I'm challenging each and every one of us to grow. Thank you.
Andre Kahelski.
The community response report is long and difficult to read, wordy and repetitive. It needs to be simplified and reworked. In some instances, proposed solutions are already part of RPD protocol. Significant points. It is regrettable that there have been negative encounters with police recently. By and large, RPD is professional and responsible. City residents want a police force that is well-trained, disciplined, and assertive. We depend on them. We pay taxes and want our laws enforced. Consider that they deal with new situations every day, often confronting very dangerous people. Police must be effective when we call on them in times of distress. Most people agree that special attention is needed for persons with mental health conditions. The Person in Crisis team was set up early this year, and it's not clear why they were not on scene during the recent incident involving a young girl in crisis. Other reform is needed, but reform recommendations is a long list of policies that would scrutinize police officers to a degree that will surely impact their morale and effectiveness. Of particular concern is the idea to electronically surveil and record all police activity to the smallest detail, then publish it on the open data portal, including demographics of all persons involved, even 211, 311, and 911 callers. This CIA-style statistical surveillance of police and us will require additional staffing, be very expensive, and render police ineffective as they worry about losing their job rather than law enforcement. The concern over behavior of white police officers toward Black suspects must be addressed by reliable personnel hiring practices, proper training, and clearly defined policing procedures, not by micromanagement. Empowering the mayor to fire police officers on the spot is not acceptable. Police activity can be complex and often requires split-second decision-making. Accordingly, they are entitled to due process. We also have a police accountability board in place to provide oversight. The report suggests that calls regarding low-level crimes may be taking too much time. Noise, illegal fireworks, and drug sales seriously impact neighborhoods and need adequate attention. Community relations are a good way to build trust with the community. Police officers visiting schools and engaging with students in classrooms creates bonds and understanding. Thanks for your consideration.
Kara Moonen, Zoom.
Hi, I am a mental health professional in Rochester. I need you to fully fund and stop obstructing the Police Accountability Board. Any and every human service provider and entity should prioritize accountability. You cannot have accountability in this role without having trauma-informed care, which was not mentioned on this bill, and implicit bias training. Just from watching like police cam videos, especially, it's really, really clear that this does not exist. And especially not to the level that it needs to exist. You cannot have, so trauma-informed care assumes that everybody has trauma. So if you have people in power, police officers, abusing their power, unleashing their unchecked trauma onto the people that are in need of their help and often require mental health attention, that is only breeding further trauma into the community, and it's not addressing the problem. And ultimately it is creating a longer lasting and repetitive issue. That's all I got. Thank you.
Wade Reed, Zoom.
Good evening, members of City Council. Executive Order 203 mandates, quote, urgent and immediate action to eliminate racial inequities in policing and to develop practices to better address the particular needs of communities of color to promote public safety, improve community engagement, and foster trust, end quote. However, it is clear that the City of Rochester is meeting this mandate with half-hearted aims and intentions instead of actionable commitments to real change. As Council President Loretta Scott said at a recent working group meeting between City Council and Mayor Warren, what we're proposing to do is what we're essentially doing. It's not getting us where we want to be now. How is it going to get us there in the future, end quote. The draft reform plan fails to both address core issues and outline measurable, sustainable steps to change. Devoting more resources to training, poorly conceived community policing programs, and the exploration of cosmetic changes to a system based in white supremacy will absolutely fail EO 203's mandate. This failure has many roots, from the 1819 slave-catching blueprint at the foundation of RPD's mission, to an unjust police union contract, to bureaucratic complicity in refusing accountability for brutal and dehumanizing behavior, to name only a few. This failure is reflected in decades of apathetic reform efforts that have done more for politicians' reputations than for public safety. As members of Rochester City Council, you must not accept complicity in this failure. Council is already neglecting its duty to dismiss officers for cause per Article 2, Section 219 of the Charter of the City of Rochester. Council must take urgent and immediate action unless you are simply more comfortable paying officers to brutalize citizens than you are paying to fight frivolous lawsuits brought by the Locust Club. The truth is that the draft reform plan doesn't do enough because reform is not enough, and the RPD must be dissolved and recommissioned alongside a fully funded PAB and ample mental health services. Only half the current force of the RPD would be required to meet the average of armed officers per 10,000 residents of cities of comparable size. This reduced force should be subject to the full authority of PAB outlined in Article 8 of the Charter of the City of Rochester to discipline and remove officers. At least half of the present RPD budget must be reallocated to unarmed public safety officers, mental health first responders, a well-structured network of mental health support services, and sustainable engagement with community groups committed to nonviolent, supportive public safety. Do not squander this moment. Take urgent and immediate action for the safety and well-being of citizens of Rochester. Thank you.
Daniel Brotman.
Less than a week before the killing of Tyshawn Jones, I heard a community leader I trust say of the RPD, "I know many of us fear they will kill again." I wish her fears were unfounded. How many more children will be traumatized? How many more lives will be lost before we take this issue seriously? I am writing to implore the City Council to fully fund the Police Accountability Board. It could not be more clear that the police department in this city regularly fails to serve and protect our citizens. If the PAB is given the resources and powers it needs to function effectively, everyone wins. The RPD may face tough changes as they are held to account, but on the other side, they could become an organization that no longer attracts the negative attention they are drawing to themselves now on a regular basis. And most importantly, the citizens of our city could be free from unjust battery, assault, and killings financed by public money. I also ask the council to give the people in crisis team the resources they need to serve our citizens in tasks they are better suited to than the police. For my safety, for my neighbor's safety, please vote to bring about a safer, more just Rochester.
Jonathan Wabaraucha.
I am a Black resident of Rochester who believes that we need to revise the current blueprint of policing in our community. I have serious concerns about the type and frequency of police response to incidents in our community that do not require police presence. 2 years ago, my then 2-year-old daughter had a seizure at home, and my wife called 911 for emergency assistance. While the EMT was providing assistance, they notified my wife that a police officer would stop by because it was standard procedure for 911 calls involving a child. The officer's presence was not required and only heightened the stress of the situation and the risk for misunderstanding. Effectively revising the blueprint of policing begins with enhancing the proposed plan. I strongly encourage the mayor and members of City Council to strengthen the proposed plan by incorporating all of PAB's recommended actions, including the recommendation to evaluate and drastically expand funding for alternative first responder models.
Kara Turney.
Good evening. When Rochester voters overwhelmingly passed the legislation to create the Police Accountability Board, this was a clear signal that there is much that needs to be addressed within the structure of RPD, including a significant lack of accountability. Voters want real change, and they want Rochester City residents at the core of this change. So when the city invited the Police Accountability Board to participate in the process to propose police reform under the governor's executive order, I was hopeful that this would be their first real and concrete chance to bring about that needed change. Their report to the working group astounded me in its clarity, its detail, and thoughtfulness. It was an impressive list of concrete changes and follow-up assessments that could improve the safety of our community. Looking at the final product of the working group, I can now see that their involvement in the process was for optics only. I see very little of their tireless work and research reflected in the final proposal. And to add to this, RPD and Wilmer Hale's role in the working group were both an embarrassment. Very little, if anything, was revealed to the public about their contributions to the process. RPD is obviously not invested in change, and I'm not sure what Wilmer Hill did to earn their money. The PAB and United Christian Leadership Ministry were the only groups to make their proposals public. The working group's final plan proposal does not make real changes. This plan does not assess anything. This plan makes it clear that the city's administration is all talk when it comes to police reform, but shows no substance. At the very minimum, we should see the word anti-racist. I didn't see it used a single time in the executive order. Less wishy-washy wording like consider and support and aim for. What programs are going to get more funding? I want actual goals. Numbers. How much added funding will we give to supportive services like the PAB and the PIC team? How much will we cut from the RPD budget to make that happen? Both of these need to happen, and I want numbers. Promises that are actually enforceable. I want to see some laws result from this. Come on, we can do better than this. Rochester
30 seconds.
Plan. Our PAB is putting in the work. They're proposing real change that Rochester City residents support. I want to see the administration do the same. Thank you for your time.
Ernie Britt, Zoom.
Ernie's not in the waiting room.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Ernie's not in the waiting room.
Okay. Chris Fitzstevens.
Please fully fund the Police Accountability Board in order to provide a complete staff to meet the charge. This is an urgent matter. The mayor's proposal is not adequate. The policies, practices, and procedures of the police department as they exist currently have failed our citizens. Please consider the well-being and safety of families and children in our great city. Fully fund the PAB.
Darrell Daniels, Zoom.
He's not in the waiting room.
Christina Bosworth.
This executive order is more race-baiting BS, pandering to people of color to garner votes, and then ultimately, as always, Dems do nothing for them. My favorite part is develop a plan to improve such deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices for the purposes of addressing the particular needs of the community served by such police agency, and promote community engagement to foster trust, fairness, legitimacy, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. Why don't we stop and examine why communities of color require more policing? Violence, crime, murders, BS as minor as noise disturbance isn't addressed and allows some people to decide they own the street and can do whatever, whenever. We need to boot out all of the out-of-state landlords who have no stake in the neighborhood. The only neighbor on my block I've had an issue with is a rental owned by a rich white man in PA who has probably never stepped foot onto the property, or at least not since buying it maybe. Constant problems with the tenants and nothing is ever done. I can't even peacefully enjoy my home that I own and pay the city taxes for. How many other city residents deal with crap like this? And police can do nothing about it. Every person has a right to live peacefully in their home. And night criminals take that away from us. Loudmouth neighbors take away from us. Our city needs more policing now more than ever.
Harry Murray, Zoom.
Hi, and thank you for taking the time to listen. Although the most important part of the report is the recommendations section, what really struck me in reading the full document is that there's no sense of urgency, no sense of crisis, despite the fact that Rochester has made the national news repeatedly this past year because of a series of humiliating and deadly encounters between RPD officers and Black citizens. Are you hearing me? Oops.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. I'm sorry. Okay. I could find no mention of Daniel Prude. The only indirect reference was on page 16. Due to recent events, the role of police officers in responding to psychiatric calls has been in question. Without explicit acknowledgement of the multiple crises facing RPD, how is anyone to believe that the report constitutes a genuine plan for reform? Many issues have already been raised about the recommendations. There are a few concrete deadlines, except for a 10-year timeline for reducing the police force and the need for full PAB funding. I want to talk primarily about police training and culture. It's obvious from watching the videos that police training needs to be totally revamped. There needs to be an independent commission to review and evaluate police training materials and practices. Specifically, training needs to focus extensively on de-escalation techniques and nonviolence. Even in the case of someone wielding a knife, there are ways to disarm that person without killing them. I've done that. Other than retreating and yelling to drop the knife, I saw no de-escalation techniques employed with Tyshawn Jones. More importantly, perhaps we need changes in police culture that are difficult to describe simply. I would suggest that all officers be asked to read and discuss Letter from Birmingham Jail as a starter. There need to be revised policies about guns and hopefully the deployment of unarmed officers.
30 seconds.
Okay. It was shocking to see the emphasis on non-lethal weapons in the report, but the lack of mention or attention to the most lethal weapons of all. Finally, the report says that RPD has a commitment to human life. It should also include a commitment to human dignity. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the waiting room?
She spoke already.
I'm sorry.
She spoke already. I'm not sure why she came back.
Okay, who is it?
It's Liz Brown.
You want to try again, or?
We can.
I don't think she was able to get her message through. She said she would email us, I believe.
Okay, let me put her back in and see.
Okay.
I will also reach out to anyone that didn't get a chance to speak via Zoom and ask for them to submit written comments.
Thank you, Katie.
Liz, if you can hear us, we were going to see if you could try your audio again.
I'm on a different device now. Maybe this will work.
I'll start your time whenever you're ready.
Okay, are you ready for me now?
Yep.
Good evening. I have lived in Rochester since 1964. I love this city and I believe it can be better. I know that we must do better. I'm also speaking as an active member of Surge Rochester, the local chapter of the national organization Showing Up for Racial Justice, which calls white people in to a multiracial coalition for justice, guided and informed by leaders of color. When I was in my 20s and new to Rochester, I was married to a young man with mental health issues, which he took out on me. In those days, there was no recourse. But even if I had to call the police, it never would have occurred to me that my blonde, hazel-eyed white husband might end up like Tyshawn Jones or Daniel Prude or so many others going back decades. My second husband, who rescued me from that situation, was a Black man who was stopped more than once for driving too nice a car, into white a neighborhood or community. In the early 1950s, he was walking downtown, a veteran of the Korean War, wearing his uniform. He crossed a street, not at a crosswalk, and was arrested for jaywalking. He loved the Army. He kept that uniform for the next 50 years of his life, but he never wore it again, and he never forgot that experience. A microaggression, you might call that today, but one of a lifetime of micro and macro racist aggressions, and always the unspoken fear that a traffic stop could get him killed. So my anti-racism is personal, and I'm grateful that being part of Surge lets me channel that into activism. Surge was an early supporter of the PAB, and we remain committed to its success as a member of the PAB Alliance. The fact that the mayor's proposal either watered down or ignored the PAB's recommendations is unconscionable. They should have been central. That the proposal is not a plan, but a document full of considering and exploring and maybe and perhaps, and we might in 5 or 10 years reduce our PO by 5 or 10 officers would be laughable if it weren't so insulting to our community, especially the Black and brown citizens who have so often been the target of police violence. What a missed opportunity for real change. You have a chance with state support to make that real change. Not reformist reforms, incrementalism, tinkering around the edges. Our citizens call on you to rethink public safety, reimagine it, and move the resources from our bloated, militarized police department, which has twice as many officers as other cities our size, and invest those funds in housing, schools, healthcare, mental health, and other services that will truly keep our community not just safe, but thriving. Thank you for the opportunity.
Is there anyone else in the waiting room that we called already?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, thank you. Madam President, that was the last speaker.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you all of our speakers who submitted comments and participated on Zoom over the last two days. We appreciate all of the feedback we've heard. My colleagues and I are continuing to review the plan as submitted by the mayor, and we'll be holding a work session on Monday at 5:30 to discuss our proposed changes. That meeting will be live streamed on our YouTube and Facebook pages. Thank you again and have a great evening.